It makes my blood boil. This is such an unforced error. Like, it makes my blood boil that we concede patriotism to people who shoot beer bottles in their backyard.
Come on.
To cosplay prepare for some Civil War fantasy that they have.
And they cosplay as traitors, the Confederates who lost.
Correct. Like, but it's not just them cosplaying and pretending to be having a monopoly on patriotism. Like, we concede that. I have so many friends on the left who are like, patriotism is problematic. Really?
Mm-hmm.
Like, really? Because there's a lot of things that my country has done that I really like, right? And I had this conversation with Noam Chomsky a long time ago. He's like, it depends on, am I patriotic? It depends on whose patriotism. Is it the patriotism of the slave owners or the patriotism of abolition? It's not a given which one patriotism means. It is completely reasonable to have an abolition-centered patriotism. Is it the patriotism of Jim Crow? Those people thought they were patriots. They had no shyness about that. Or the patriotism of the civil rights movement. You think MLK didn't think he was a patriot? Like, I don't understand this pose of thinking patriotism is problematic, because then you're basically admitting that there's something natural in their interpretation of the country and that yours is somehow not an authentic, natural, proud statement of the country. You're kind of conceding that your values are like less American. I don't concede that for one bit. I don't concede that for one bit. I love those founding words. And by the way, like, the fact that we didn't live up to them at the beginning and have struggled to ever since does not impugn those words. Those are some very, very radical words that have given the most marginalized people in this country their lodestar for the ensuing 300 years. And my family comes from India, where the idea of natural, I don't even believe in God, but like the idea of natural God-given equality, self-evident human equality, that is in India. I don't think that is a widely agreed upon idea in India today, right? India is, people have called it the most hierarchical society in the world. Like, it is a full society built on the idea that people are naturally unequal, right? So, and more of the world was like India in the late 1700s than like what the founder said. So they were not brave enough to live up to what they wrote, but they gave us a set of marching orders that are awesome and that were a real break from prior history, real break from prior ideas, and have animated every great liberation movement in this country, have given them the texts and the tools. No liberation movement in this country has ever had to say, here's some totally new idea that I would like to spring on y'all. Every liberation movement has been able to be like, you wrote this, there's this thing here I just saw on the wall. Do you mind implementing this? It would be nice if can we just do this thing that was like written right here? That's a very powerful thing. That doesn't have, you don't have that in every, so I'm a patriot of what was written in that wall and of all the people who've, given enough of a shit to try to say, can we actually do what's written on the wall? And so as I look to the work after these midterms, the work that begins Wednesday morning, frankly, regardless of whether it's a surprisingly great night for Democrats or a surprisingly great night for Republicans, there is going to be a monumental task to build a movement that can outcompete fascism. And my honest diagnosis is, whether we win a seat, lose a seat, we right now are not in possession of a movement.
That's right.
Adequate to the task of beating fascism.
Yep.
That's right.
We might outgun it at certain moments, right? I mean, you can, right? But like, we're playing Federer here, right? Like if Federer was a like large fascist movement, and and like even like a really medium player might beat Federer every now and then, but it is going to take to durably beat back this authoritarian menace to kind of get to the result that I was saying we've had every time and time again on every major extension of the blessings of liberty to more people. We're going to have to build a movement that I think does a handful of things that I wouldn't even say we're not doing well right now. Like, in some cases, I don't even think we're attempting to do right now. And I'll just give you my very quick rattled off the list. Like, I think we need a strategy for attention, right? I think the right understands commanding attention, and we just don't have a politics of attention. We don't get it. The exceptions like AOC prove the rule. Like, what she's doing is like what every politician should be able to do in the 21st century if you want to actually move anything. And we can't have one person who knows how to do it. Second, meaning making, right? This is a confusing time. Racial change, gender change, globalization, China. These are all things that have changed everybody's life. We have a lot of people we're essentially trying to manage down from privilege, unearned privilege. We have just a whole bunch of like climate change, like a whole bunch of people working in an area that we're trying to say like, sorry, like the industries you spent your life in that your granddaddy and daddy spent, no good anymore. Like all of these are like really big shifts we're asking people to go through for mostly good causes. But I think we've totally failed to help people process leaving behind the old them. Who is the new them? Are they going to be okay with the new them? Will they be happy on the other side of the mountain? I think we have to do a way better job of meeting voters where they are, not having high barriers to entry for a progressive movement. But we need to be a progressive movement, self-confident enough that if you don't know the terms, you can still come in and you can actually learn the terms in our space.
Yep.
You don't have to learn the terms on the street by yourself and then ring the doorbell once you're, totally woke. I think we need more of a sense of fight, pick fights, name names, generatively scapegoat actual villains, not be so scared of going low when they go low. I think we need a party that is actually physically rooted in people's lives. We have to stop being an extremely online movement, chip in $5 movement. Every building in our major cities and every, block in the suburbs should have a Democratic Party representative who is someone you call when you get a weird letter from the IRS and you need some help, right? Those were the kinds of, as Bhaskar Sankara has written, those were the kinds of parties, left labor parties in the 20th century around the world that won big. They were rooted. Every tenement building, there was like the Democratic Party lady on the third floor, and you'd go up and she, I have no idea in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, like who I would go to if I had a problem from the Democratic Party. It's just not a thing that exists anymore. And finally, I think, to go back to the patriotism thing, we have to tell the better story about America.
Yep.
Right now, our policy agenda is clearly superior. We're not liars. We're not idiots. I don't think we're telling the better story about America. And I don't think that's anybody's fault but ours. I think, it's an unforced error. I think we have an amazing, amazing story to tell. I think the kind of country we're trying to build, we got three different children of immigrants in this country on this podcast. This is the American dream. Come to America and get a podcast. And
host a podcast.
Let's be honest, right? And I don't mean shade to any other countries, but I like to sometimes be honest about a certain kind of exceptionalism that is true. Like, this wouldn't be a podcast in India. Like, India's a country for Indian people. Like most countries.
Not for me. Maybe you all, but I'd be like, I'd be running for my life.
Exactly. Like China is for Chinese people. China's not trying to be a country of the world. Frankly, all these countries in Europe, they have their safe 15, 20% brown people, but like they're keeping it in those are white countries. Those are white countries, right? Britain, white country. Like London's great, but like that's a white country with some people in it that are kept at an appropriate level for them, right? We are trying to do something really different, much more fun, with much better food and much harder, which is to build a true country made of the world, right? A true superpower of color. We're doing it. It is happening in our lifetimes. Like if you live in New York or California, you already live in it, and it's coming for everyone. And I don't think we tell a galvanizing, thrilling story about what an awesome pursuit this is. About
Anand, real quick, it's the ethnic Avengers. That's what I always say. And Danielle's given me the wrap up, but I'm gonna use my privilege and power as co-host to ask one last quick question, because it's something that, regardless of what happens on Tuesday or Wednesday morning, I agree with you. Danielle agrees with you. We've talked about it every week that we have to fight fascism and that we're dealing with the fascist movement. And the analogy I've always given is a flabby moderate majority will be carved like butter against a zealous, organized minority, right? If you don't organize, doesn't matter if you have the numbers. But there is something to be said about fighting, but also forgiving. There is something to be said about reaching out and communicating. There is something to be said about when do you resist and when do you give a hug. And there's a chapter in your book, and very quick, it's called Can Love Change a Mind? And as we're dealing with a fascist movement that is emboldened with hate, conspiracy theories, racism, and literally dehumanizes the three people on this panel, the final question I have very quickly is when do we and when should we and how should we exercise love in the fight against fascism and as we build this multicultural coalition to save democracy?
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful question. I, in many ways, understand what I'm advocating here to be a politics of love, which I don't think is a politics of sweetness and, candy and roses. I think a politics of love is both a generous thing and a muscular thing and a feisty thing and a thing with boundaries, right? Love, good love has boundaries. I think one of the key questions for me, we have to make a couple kinds of distinctions to handle this right. And I think we're right now lumping, when we think about the fascism problem, and I do this too, just a whole lot of different things together that are quite meaningful to separate. Number one is leaders from followers, right? I think as Democrats, opposition to fascism, we need to be harder on the leaders than we are being right now, and gentler on followers in general relative to leaders, and recognize a distinction, right? There's a way in which I think at our worst, we sometimes treat a person watching Fox News and a billionaire ruining that person's mind as sort of the same level of moral culpability. And in part because the people who watch it are like closer to us and we can reach them. We can actually yell at them. Rupert Murdoch is protected from our anger. We don't know him. We know people who are his victims. And so one of the things that several of my subjects said to me in different ways is like, we just have to distinguish victims from perpetrators. Now, what the problem with fascism is some of these victims are also themselves perpetrators, but they are low-level perps of fascism versus like the cartel bosses of fascism. I just think we need like
they're not the capos or the mob bosses.
Right? And so then the question becomes in that the people who are not the Rupert Murdochs, I think again there you have to distinguish the kind of 20% who I was talking about before, who really wants fascism in America.
Okay.
Who've read the books, they've watched the videos, and I think them you got to also kiss down the river. Right? Though you're not persuading those people. I don't think those people need your love. Right? I think where the love and the mercy comes in is a bunch of people in that 60% in the middle, about half of whom right now are like Fasc-Curious, right?
Oh, shit.
And they,
Fash adjacent, Fasc-Curious, open to Fash.
And they're like, they've definitely voted with it a couple times, if not more. They harbor the more latent kind of racism rather than the burning churches kind of racism that might be more in that more extreme group. They also have contradictory impulses, sentiments, commitments. They are embarrassed for their children to think they're prejudice. There's just other things going on in that group. And I think rather than just like spraying love everywhere, I think we need to be very clear about a kind of strategic approach to that group of people that is not letting anybody off the hook, that's not holding people accountable, et cetera, but that is a strategically loving politics that says, like, you actually really want to come with us. Like, or at least a bunch of you really want to come with us. Our parties are more fun. Our food is way tastier and spicier. Our vision of America is more enthralled. Like, you will have more fun in our America. Like, you will like yourself more. Like, you will be okay. Like, your wife will become empowered and like it will actually be fine. Like, you'll be great. It's actually great when like your wife makes more money than you because that's just money in your house that you can enjoy. Like that group of people who are not deeply ideologically committed to this dystopian fascistic direction, but who are like vibing themselves into it, or joiners flowing with the crowd into it. That is the group. That is who we need to be thinking about. That is where our organizing failure is right now. That's where the messaging failure is right now. And the goal, as you know, is never to get, all 60 or half of that 30%. If in this country you get in a given year 3% of that 30 to say, I like that guy, or I like that issue, or the Dobbs decision is beyond what I'm willing to brook, or whatever. That 3% is the difference in heaven and hell in this country, right? It's just,
Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia.
Exactly. So it's a politics of love with a very strategic understanding of what the goal is here, which is to have enough people who are not quite morally committed and morally certain say, you know what they're saying actually feels better to me. Feels better to me. And I'm not able to change my full being to be part of their movement, but I'm going to just go with their movement.